Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Empowering Women in Educational Leadership podcast. I am your host, Dr. Stephanie Duguid. It is such a pleasure to be here with you today. Thank you for listening. For those of you that don't know me or are new to the show, I always share a few details about the backstory of the Empowering Women in Educational Leadership show with you. As a lifetime educator with a mother who was an influential teacher in a Texas high school for over 40 years, I felt it was a natural transition to highlight strong women in educational leadership. So many times, women assume they have to have a title to be a leader, which is not true at all. Women inspire, guide, support, and empower each other. Those women are transformational leaders who focus on elevating one another through mentorship, whether intentional or not. I wanted to highlight the great things and people supporting women in educational leadership. I personally have been in education for over 30 years at the K-12 and higher education level as a teacher, athletic trainer, and administrator. I am now the owner of Do Good Leadership, where I'm a professional speaker, leadership and success coach and mentor, author, consultant, and podcast host. My focus has shifted from working within an institution to a new focus where I can serve, elevate, and inspire women to be exceptional educational leaders at all levels. This show is an opportunity to bridge the connection between where a woman in education is and where she wants to be after developing leadership skills and confidence to become that empowering, transformational leader. The key is to find a strong mentor to help guide you along the way. My mother was my mentor until she died in a car accident when I was 27. I've made it my life's purpose to develop, serve, support, and empower women in educational leadership through mentorship. Therefore, I help women in education exponentially elevate their impact as a positive, confident, and transformational leader. I'm honored to have this opportunity to highlight amazing things women are doing in education. And today, I am so excited to have Dr. Carol Parker Walsh, who is an expert in transformational leadership and human development and has been recognized with multiple awards for her profound impact. As the CEO and founder of Carol Parker Walsh Consulting Group, her firm specializes in leadership development, executive coaching, and talent optimization, and partners with leading organizations to cultivate a culture that accelerates leadership capabilities and drives future organizational success. With an extensive and diverse background spanning 3 decades as an employment attorney, consultant, researcher, brand strategist, and senior leader in major health and academic institutions, Dr. Parker Walsh offers unparalleled insight for guiding leaders and organizations. She's been a TEDx speaker, an Amazon bestselling author, and her peers have recognized her as a member of Forbes Coaches Council, Forbes BLK, Newsweek Expert Forum, and Entrepreneurs Leadership Network. As a mentor, she mentors young professionals, a fellow of the Harvard Institute of Coaching, a frequent keynote speaker, and a trusted career and leadership expert on ABC's AM Northwest morning show. Dr. Parker Walsh's academic achievements include a JD from Chicago Kent College of Law, 2 masters in human and organizational development, a PhD from Fielding Graduate University, and a certificate in management development from Harvard University. Her firm intentionally partners with forward-thinking organizations prioritizing a people-centered approach to nurturing leaders at every level. Wow, Dr. Parker Walsh, that is incredible. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. And it was a mouthful, as you could hear, as I was going
I
along the way.
know. I know. I want to record it and play it back in the morning when I wake up so I can feel good in the morning. It sounds so impressive.
It does sound so impressive. And I love that you're starting off with this because even before we get into the questions, for those that are listening, as you write down some of the accolades that you have, and you're like, well, I can't believe that I've done all those things. If you write them down and read it to yourself as if you're speaking about somebody else, just like you did, you go, wow, that sounds really awesome.
Absolutely. For
That's a great,
sure.
that's a great way to work on your self-confidence, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
So please share with us as we get started your personal journey and how you became a leader in your field. I mean, you have so much experience and such a diverse background. Share with us a
hmm
little snippet as to how you got where you are.
Yeah, well, I started, as you mentioned, my career as a labor and employment attorney, and this was back in the 80s when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do when I grow up. And the reason that I went into labor and employment law was because I had a couple of bad experiences with bosses and leaders. And
Mm.
I wanted to be able to be of some type of support or help to people who spend really the majority, we spend the majority of our days and lives working, at our jobs. And I thought it shouldn't be a miserable experience. It should be something enjoyable. And I wanted to help people. Well, at the time in the 80s, organizational consulting, leadership development, it was more of a theoretical study than it was a practice or that people actually sought a career after. And so I didn't, I think if I knew then what I know now, I would have followed that pathway with my career. But I went into law and represented obviously plaintiffs, representing employees against employers who were behaving badly. And, for 10 years, I worked for labor unions and for firms representing people in, employment discrimination litigation and labor relations issues or grievances or anytime they were, not being treated fairly within the organization. But over time, as we kind of fast forward into the 2000s, this idea of organizational consulting was coming to bear. And I really wanted to do more of that work. Law is so adversarial and you're always fighting and you're always dealing with things at the back end of the problem as opposed to being more proactive to really help bring about solutions. So I decided to transition out of law into doing organizational consulting. And that's when I went back to school and did start to understand the theoretical frameworks and then really begin to practice that in the work that I've done. And, through that time, I've also, I've taken on leadership positions. I was a director of professional diversity development and director of academic graduate programs and associate dean, was an HR director. So I've held some leadership roles as well, but I really, really loved when I was able to work with individuals to be able to support them in developing themselves and work with organizations to help them think of themselves a little bit differently and not just focus on the bottom line, but focus on the people within the organization. And so that's what brought me to what I'm doing now. And over the last 10 years, I have just been honing and developing my work, my practice, really working to position myself as a leader in the field. I pride myself on always looking at the future of work and what's coming up next within the industry and always wanting to bring those future ready capabilities to everything that I'm doing so that we're not just getting ourselves ready for today, but really preparing ourselves for tomorrow. And that's really been the focus of the work that I've done. And that's what's helped to really position me and, into as a leader in my field.
Well, I love that. And you've hit on a few things as you were talking, and I want to hit on each one of those or pull each one of those out. But the first thing you mentioned is that rather than being, and I'm going to change the term, you said reactive or trying to fix something on the back end, is to be proactive. So,
Yes.
how have you seen individuals or organizations that are able to make that shift? And how do they have to think differently about what they're doing in order to do so?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I have seen organizations make that shift. I have unfortunately seen far too many that don't. They're still very reactive to things. And part of the issue is that they're so focused on the bottom line and achieving goals and objectives and making sure people are doing what they're supposed to be doing and those type of things, which should be focused on. I'm not saying those should be ignored, but the ones who get it are more proactive in thinking, okay, we have people in the roles who know how to get things done. How can we support them to feel more valued and respected in their role? How can we provide opportunities so they want to stay and we have greater retention so that they can promote and, stay with us for longer terms? How can we make sure that they are loving what they're doing? So we're providing opportunities that are really geared to support them. So, really, from my perspective, what that means is that they're not just looking at the business of running an organization, but they're also really invested in the people in the organization and really looking at how can we make sure that our people, who are our greatest assets, are operating at the maximum level and potential that they can be, and what can we do as an organization to make sure that that's being taken care of. So for me, the ones who have made that transition from reactive to proactive are the ones who understand the value of the people in the organization and they invest time, energy, and money into supporting the people management side of the organization.
Have you found that as an organization that the leader has to be the one to recognize that? And if they do, it happens, and if they don't, it doesn't? Or do you feel that it's really a culmination of the organization itself?
It's the leader. I mean, the people are the organization, right? So it
That's
starts
right.
with the leader. And if the highest echelon of the leader, the CEO or people in the C-suite aren't having that conversation and aren't putting that priority out there for the rest of the organization, it's absolutely not going to happen. I've had way too many conversations with colleagues and even clients who are struggling because even though they're in a leadership position, they're not in the decision-making level within the organization. And as much as they see where the organization may not be getting it right, the people at the top are like, oh, we're fine. It's all good. People are happy while they're having high turnover and, attrition rates are out of control, or people are promoting, or, they're just not having the best reputation out in the community, but they're
Mhm.
making money, and that's what their priority is. And so if it doesn't happen with the top leadership, it's not going to happen at all.
Well, and I assumed that's what you were going to say, but I wanted you to say it without me asking
Yes.
specifically. So I have seen that so many times where if the person who's at the top, whoever that is, and of course we have to have some sort of organizational structure, there's always somebody that's at the top. But if that person doesn't recognize the value of the people that work for them, you're not going to get that investment in the time, money, and resources for those individuals. And so, part of your bio talked about you prioritizing a people-centered approach. And that's exactly what we're talking about here, is if
Yeah.
you build that relationship and you support the individuals, then it seems like the rest tends to fall in line.
Absolutely. Like our tagline is when your people thrive, organizational success is inevitable.
Oh,
And
I love
that
it.
is true. That is
Yes.
that has been found true in every situation. And so there's no situation that I could, think about or have even seen where, oh no, we've invested in our people and we still are horrible. So yeah.
It almost makes me chuckle. I mean, you heard me laugh out loud. That, I mean, that just seems like it's there. But
Right.
one of the individuals that I've done some work with is John Gordon. He does power positive
Yeah.
leadership, power positive teams. And so when he talks about positive leadership, one of the scenarios that he utilizes is a tree. You've got the root and you've got the fruit. So the
Hmm.
root represents your people and the fruit represents all the data and the outcomes. And if you focus on the fruit, but you don't take care of the root, your tree's going to end up dying. But if you
Yes.
focus on the people, and you might not see the fruit for a little bit, but if you focus on the people and the root, then you're definitely going to see that fruit just thrive. And so
Yes.
it's not always about the policies and procedures, it's about the people. And that's something that I've said
Yes.
on multiple podcasts. Not all about policies and procedures, it's all about the people. So
Absolutely.
one of the other pieces that you shared is that, for the last 10 years, you've been looking at the future of work and what's coming down next in the industry. And so something that I know that you've had experience with is looking at these talent pipelines, particularly related to women leadership in complex hybrid environments. And so
Hmm.
we're not just talking about the traditional, go to work in your car, spend time in the office and come home, but the pandemic has showed us that a lot of things have opportunities to be hybrid. So
Hmm.
how can we focus on our organizational culture, really highlighting our people in these complex hybrid environments?
Yeah, that's really a great question. The first thing you have to do is to be able to ask questions of your people and to figure out what they need to have the support that they need. We have to stop looking at business as usual or the way that we've done things and release the idea that we're going back to business as usual, or let's try to get back to what we were before.
The
And
new
we
normal.
really, yes, yes. And we have to really release that and start deconstructing that and reconstructing a new way of doing work, because we are in a new age of work. And so we have to stop thinking as remote and hybrid being the thing that we're trying to figure out or work on, and seeing it as a thing that we do, right? We have to
Mhm.
stop seeing, having flexibility in how people work and what they're doing as an option or a benefit or bonus, and seeing it as just the way that we need to work. When we had the pandemic, the one population that was most impacted in the workplace were women. Women left or were put out of the workforce because of the pandemic. And since then, we are still seeing 1 in 4 women leaving the workplace. In fact, it was predicted that this year and next year, that we're going to see up to 27 to 33% of women continuing to leave the workplace. And we also know that when women are in the workplace, particularly when they're in upper echelon levels of leadership, that organizations thrive financially by up to 30%. Right. And so the data is there that the impact of having women in the workplace, we also see greater mobility, retention, diversity, and inclusion when women are in leadership positions in organizations. And so we have the data that shows that when we can get women into the pipelines, develop them, and position them for positions of leadership in the future, that the organization is going to be bound to have more success within that. So we have to start thinking about, okay, we're getting women in, but we're losing them in the middle. And so that's breaking the pipeline. We're not able to promote them, give them, they're not having opportunities that or allowing them to step into higher levels of leadership. So how are we developing and training our managers? How are we teaching them about delegation and time management so they have the space and time to offer career support or career pathing to women in organizations? And also right now, in addition to women, we're also looking at generations because millennials are the highest generation right now in the workforce. And they tend to be, along with Gen Zs, they tend to leave in about 2 to 5 years within the workforce. So when we think about succession planning and building that echelon of leadership in the next 5, 10, or 20 years within an organization, if you are not building your people and positioning them for success, you are going to be struggling with sustainability and the ability to have the level of revenue and impact and reputation that you may have right now, because you're not going to have people in that pipeline who are ready and prepared to step into those positions. So right now, that's what organizations need to be focused on is where is the gap? And how are we building a robust pipeline so that when we decide to retire or move on, we have the people that we need to step right into those leadership positions and carry us through and carry us on.
You have hit on so many incredible points and topics in that because I think that since the pandemic, people just put a little blurb or a little paragraph in their PMPs about, oh, you can work hybrid or, oh, you can do remote. And it's not a band-aid approach. As we're moving forward, it's you have got to overhaul everything that you've done and thought of because it's not going back to normal or the
Right.
way it used to be.
Yeah.
Whenever whenever you are shifting and changing, it's just like trying to create a new habit. You can't just do something for a little while and then go back to the way it was. If you're going to invest in it, you have to think about how it affects every part of your life or whatever you do. How does it affect you in the morning? How does it affect you in the afternoon? Do you have the appropriate attire to do it? Do you have the appropriate resources to do what you need to do?
Mm-hmm.
So I think what you've just hit on is that a lot of folks have thought that, oh yeah, we're hybrid, or we have a policy about being hybrid or remote, but that's the band-aid. It's
Yeah.
how do we really develop and rethink? Because whenever we talk about innovation, we had to get very innovative quickly during the pandemic.
Yes.
And when we did that, it was emergency innovation. What is the band-aid for right now? But things shouldn't stay that way. It's now what worked, what didn't work. Let's evaluate the process. Let's try to anticipate what we need next. You're not going to know everything. It's just like in college, you're getting a degree for half the jobs that aren't even created yet.
Yeah.
So let's anticipate what's out there and figure out how can we best serve our people and make
Mm-hmm.
sure that they can be successful, but we're still hitting our marks or our goals for what we need to do in the process to support those folks and make our company a success.
Absolutely. And the thing about it, if you would just ask your people or poll your people what would they like or what would they need in terms of work. And let me just say, I know every profession can't work in a hybrid situation. In fact, every profession didn't even through the pandemic, right? And so we know there are
Right.
some positions where we need to have people face to face and we need to have people on the ground doing that work. But where there's an opportunity, it can't be, oh, we have a policy that we actually don't enforce or really allow people to do. Right. But really, how do we embed into the way that we work and the way that we operate and the way that we support our people around these new ways of thinking? I don't know if you saw this video that went viral where the who was it? It was WebMD, the CEO of WebMD, I think it was, made this video. And it was supposed to just be internal only, but it kind of got out. And he said, we've been letting you work from remotely, but now we need you to come back in and study show we get more done and we're more productive and we're better when we're actually face to face. And he said something like, I'm not going to just tell you that. Let my executive team tell you. So all the executive teams were saying, yes, we need you back. We need you back. And then at the end of the video, he said, oh, and by the way, we're not asking you, this is basically a command. And they
Mhm.
played this song of, I think it's called Aiko Aiko, that in the underscore underneath it, the subtitles, it said, and we mean business, like we're not playing. And it went viral because the attacks that he got were just out of this world. People are like, what are you doing? First of all,
Yeah.
it was all the executive team, and they didn't even look enthusiastic about, yeah, we
Mhm.
need you to back at work. It felt like it was a top-down, authoritative, director and command control
Mhm.
of this is what we want, this is what we're going to do, with no input from their people, with no idea if it really was something that that would work for their organization by bringing everyone back. They said it was, but if you've been functioning pretty successfully with people not there, then clearly, you are still doing some good things. So
Mhm.
this demand and control way of running things and leading things, and this old school way of thinking, is not going to be sustainable when you're looking at generations, particularly, like I said, the millennials and the Gen Zs that are coming in hot, who
Mhm.
believe in having this greater level of independence and flexibility and autonomy in their work. And we're still operating on these principles that were designed, by boomers and the traditionalists years ago,
Yep.
that just do not and will not work in the future of work.
Well, and that is so true, especially in education. I've always had instructors that said, "Well, I've always done it this way. I've got the same lesson plan I've had for 20 years." Well, then you're about 19 years behind. So so we have to figure out how to shift because your students today weren't even born then. So we have to
Right.
rethink the way that you do things. And I keep talking about the pandemic, but what that did, especially with innovation, innovation isn't about somebody who's always forward thinking. It's about somebody who's had experience and in a dire need that something had to change. And that's usually where a lot of
Yes.
innovation comes out. So innovation is not always easy. It's usually when you have the struggle is finding some sort of solution for that struggle. And then you always have to evaluate it and go back and think about it again and evaluate it again and keep trying. So it's just this whole cyclical process that goes through. It's not like, oh, I have an idea, let's make it go and it's going to work forever. That's not the way that it goes. But I love that
No,
you
and
yeah,
and I just wanted to say that, and it requires that the organization have a culture in which innovation and creativity can flourish. Because even if someone does come up with something, if you have a culture that's not open to new ideas, and I'm not, just to your point, I'm not saying that if I have a new idea, we should implement it tomorrow.
right.
But if I am in a place where I feel free to be able to supply my ideas and share my thoughts, or different
Mhm.
approaches to how we've done things, and I know that will be taken seriously and at least
Mhm.
entertained at some level, then you are making space for the possibility of greater innovation in your organization. So from a cultural perspective, again, going back to the leader and developing a culture of that, you have to make sure that there is safety and trust to allow for spaces of creativity and innovation to flourish so that you can keep up with the times and not be limited.
Well, and that comes with really focusing on your people, getting to know your people, building those relationships, trusting. I think trust is a huge part of this. And so when we talk about you talked about having diverse population that are in the workplace, because what I have seen in some of my experiences is that those that are hiring want to hire people that are a lot like them. So there's not a lot of
Yes.
friction. But when
Yes.
you do that, you don't have the diversity, you don't have the creativity, you don't have the innovation and all of those things with the ideas. And at the same time, if it's my way and everybody's going to agree with me, then you don't have that safety about let's think of new ideas because they're always going to shoot them down. So it
Yes.
is essential that you don't always have people that think like you do. You might think it's resistance and like, oh my gosh, Bob is he's gonna go against it again. He's gonna find something that's wrong with it. Well, thank goodness for Bob's in the world
Yeah.
because that's how we find our gaps and make sure we take care and bridge any of those challenges before it goes out to, the rest of the world.
Absolutely. It's like the story. I often tell the story about the giraffe and the elephant. I don't know if this is a story that R. Roosevelt Thomas, he wrote in his book, Build a House for Diversity back in the 90s. But the story is so appropriate. And he talks about the story where the giraffe built this house that won the Giraffe of the Year award and everyone loved it. And his friend, the elephant, was walking down the street and he said, "Oh, that's my friend. I would love to invite him in to see my house." But as soon as the elephant tried to enter the doors were too small. But he said, "Oh, luckily we made them, expandable." So the elephant got in. But every time he made a move, he broke the stairs or he hit a wall or he broke a table. And the giraffe said to him, and I'm paraphrasing this, but the giraffe said to him, "There's a ballet class down the street. Maybe we can send you there to get light on your feet. Or, and maybe if you lost a few pounds, you could be able to move around more easily in my house." And the elephant said to the giraffe, those are decent ideas, but I don't think a house built by a giraffe and for a giraffe is ever going to have space for an elephant. And I think that is the whole point of building a house that allows for innovation, and diversity of thought and creativity in organizations, is that when you have, like you mentioned, confirmation bias, or that anchor of where there's like-minded, like people, houses built by giraffes for giraffes with giraffes, and then anytime the elephant or somebody else comes up with a different idea, it's like, "Oh, no, 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 that won't work here because we have this
Mhm.
great house and has won
Mhm.
awards and is so amazing." And so we have to start building different houses as we move forward
Mhm.
in organizations if we really want to create space for people to really flourish all together.
Well, and that I love the visual, by the way. So thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to go buy that book and look that book up and read it tomorrow. But I love that idea and that thought, because that is so true. Even if you have a house that gets all these awards and it's publicly recognized, there are still malfunctions going on. There was a school that I was working with, not in Mississippi, it was in another state, that had just won all these incredible awards, like Aspen Awards and all these other things. And I went over there to work on something about, positive leadership, and they go, "We really need you. We've just won all these awards, but we're broken.
Wow.
We have what looks like a great institution, but we really need some help, because what leadership is saying is not what actually is happening. And there's
Yes,
animosity between the different levels." And so I just think that that's so important. It's like Facebook, whatever you see is not always what is true.
that's
It's
true.
kind of the surface as to what you see. My gosh, such
Yeah.
good stuff. So, as we're talking about leaders, and sometimes when we have leaders that are in different positions, they almost feel like they don't belong there. And so that's where some of the challenges
Mm,
come with leadership. And so, that term that you and I both know is imposter syndrome.
yeah.
So, share with me some of your experience in working with individuals that have imposter syndrome, or how women in leadership roles can combat those feelings of imposter syndrome and build that lasting confidence. How do they do
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, that is a great question. A lot of, imposter syndrome comes from this lack of belief really within yourself. It's a lack of self-confidence and a belief within yourself. And I always tell people that there's a difference between confidence and self-confidence. And confidence is having the belief that you can do something because you've already done it before,
Mm,
versus self-confidence is believing in something you haven't done before just because you know it's possible, right? So it's believing in what's possible because you feel that you at the baseline have the knowledge, skills, abilities, and strengths to be able to get it done, right? Even though you haven't done that before, you still believe that it's possible for you. And for me, imposter syndrome comes from this lack of self-belief, right? So unless we have evidence that I can do something, then there's a belief that we can do it. And for so long, women have always been subjected to these underlying messages of what they can't do and what they're not able to do. And honestly, in our society, we tend to focus on what people don't do well than we do on what people do well, right? Unless they're kind of a sports person or something. But even if they're great at what they're doing, if they make a flaw or fail, we tend to harp on that more than anything else. And so it's not uncommon that we do suffer from this idea that unless I have evidence that I could get it done, that there's no possible way for me to go after that. And so women particularly are subject to that more than men, but men suffer from imposter syndrome, as well. So for me, what I always say, what I tell my clients and what I work with my clients around is really shifting the narrative around what's possible. And if you could start shifting that narrative and start really leaning into what it is that you're able to do and start owning that and seeing that as a platform to what's possible, then it can really diminish this idea that you can't do something, or that you're falsely placed in the wrong position, or you shouldn't own that title, or you shouldn't go after that particular job, or something of that nature. A lot of it goes back to when we started this, and we talked about how when you read my bio and how
Mhm.
when you read it, it's like, what is that me? And so really to get over imposter syndrome, it's almost like constantly reinforcing that I'm really good at something. I often have my clients create what I call a hundreds list, where they
Mhm.
have to write down at least 100 things that they are fantastic at, that they're good at, that they're wonderful at, that they love doing, that's amazing and exciting. Rarely, if ever, do people get to 100, because we don't see ourselves in that light. But the
Mhm.
more that we could start leaning into, wait a minute, I'm good at this, wait a minute, I know this, actually I did take this department from this to that, actually I did close that $1 million deal, or actually I was able to salvage a dysfunctional department and turn it into something else. And if we
Mhm.
start harping on the things that we have done, then it starts to develop that ability to feel confident about what's possible. Because if you can achieve these things without having known how to do them, but you've been able to do it, then it gives you the confidence to know that you can do something different. So it's really shifting that narrative around what's possible for you that allows you to move past and through imposter syndrome to the other side.
Well, and I love that you broke out confidence versus self-confidence. I don't know that anybody else has that I've talked with in past several years has really said there is a difference in those two things. And imposter syndrome is really related to self-confidence. And just as you noted with your bio, I'm not joking when I say, everybody should write out their, top 100 list or their hundreds list and have it readily available for those days that you're like, oh my gosh, what am I doing here? And you read that and you go, wow, that was me. Because so many times we look at the end result, oh my gosh, how are we going to do that? But if we take baby steps along the way, oh, okay, I've made it through this mountain. Ooh, okay, I've made it to the next mountaintop. All right, I've made it to the next
Mhm.
mountaintop. And before you know it, you're there. I mean, you've just climbed
Yes.
Mount Everest. But again, as you mentioned, is we are in a society that focuses on gaps and weaknesses. I mean, that's how a
Hmm.
lot of schools are created. Is
Yep.
you're not meeting these points that these objectives that I'm looking for the way that I want them. Forget that you have this incredible way that your mind thinks and you've gone in these other directions, but you're not meeting my task list or you're not meeting my way of doing
Hmm.
things. So focusing on strengths. And I just encourage anybody, if you see somebody that is awesome at something, acknowledge them for it. Even if
Hmm.
it's, you have an eagle eye whenever you are evaluating some of these technical documents. Thank you so much for finding all of those challenges that I had in my document. Or if they always have a smile on their face, whatever it is, I encourage you focus on somebody's strengths because not only are they going to go, wow, you noticed something, but that's going to make them stand up a little bit taller and feel like, you know what? I belong here. I'm
Absolutely.
doing something good.
Absolutely. And I often, get on my leaders who are in an older generation, because when they come across the millennial or Gen Z who has a sense of confidence, who believes like they just started the job on Tuesday and they should be promoted on Wednesday, right?
Yes. Yes.
God bless it. And but I watch leaders try to diminish that within them. Right? Now, granted, that's not realistic. I get that. But don't squash that belief in someone's ability to be able to do something that in your mind you don't think they're able to accomplish, because they believe that they're able to accomplish it. It's one of the things I admire about the generation. I think it's something that the older generation rather, can really learn
Mhm.
from the younger generation, is to kind of take a little bit of that belief, because they grew up constantly more reinforced by family and friends of what of the potential that they have in front of them. And I know I'm a boomer, so I know our generation, that's not what we got. we got,
Hmm.
oh, I want to do this. And immediately that's not possible. There's no way you can do that. Oh, you're either a girl or you're too small or you're too, like, we got constant, like, realistic,
Yes.
practical advice that diminished our ability to believe in what's possible for ourselves, that the younger generation actually has on a little bit better than we do. It's something that we can learn
Hmm.
from them for sure.
Oh, I love that. And so, as you're talking about these different generations, I'm sure that communication and the way you communicate is a huge part about the relationship building.
Yeah.
So, is there anything that you've seen? Because you just talked about the older generation and trying to diminish. So, a lot of it is aggressive talking, where we have a
Hmm.
younger generation, which is a lot of, optimistic type, phrases. So how do we get on that same page? What are some things that we do? We talked about being positive, or we talked about, having diverse feedback and making sure that everybody is aware that, their ideas are welcome. So what are some key pieces with effective communication that we can focus on as we're trying to make sure that our organizations are focusing on the people?
Yeah. I think emotional intelligence cannot be under emphasized here.
Hmm.
The ability to have some self-awareness,
Hmm.
some ego management, and the ability to kind of see yourself in a real situation, not in a way to beat up on yourself, but to have that deep sense of awareness where you can be able to kind of develop your own way of thinking and not be kind of stuck in one way of thinking. Most of this work starts with yourself before you try to help other people. And too
Hmm.
often we come from positions of knowing and not positions of learning or curiosity. We think we know what's best. I did a talk on generations, and the one caveat I always give people, amongst many caveats actually, but one of them is that no generation is better than the other. So stop approaching it as if we're the better generation and then something's wrong with that generation on
Hmm.
both ends, that, you all are too stuck in your ways. You all are too, we have to stop looking at it from a competition or a judgment perspective, right? That we know what's best and that we need to teach you, versus coming at it from a place of curiosity of that this is what I know, because this a generation is defined by what happens in the social culture that surrounds it. So I know what I
Hmm.
know because this is the time in which that I grew up and developed that sense of knowledge. You grew up in a very different time. Plus, I always tell boomers, we created the generation they're growing up in. So if anyone's to blame, it's really us. So before you start, so let's
Pointing
remember
fingers.
that. Let's remember that we developed the society in which they're growing up in. But we have to start looking at what everyone brings to the table and look at it from an appreciative approach. But we have to start with ourselves and start with this level, like I said, of ego management and empathy and self-awareness, and all of these things that emotional intelligence brings to bear, that allows us to be more introspective, so that, again, we could come from a place of curiosity and learning and not come from this attack or I know what's best, but to actually listen to each other and hear each other and find those spaces of common ground.
Well, when you talk about this, I've used the term emotional intelligence in some of my talks that I've done as keynotes. And I've had some people say, oh, great. So now there's another excuse for why people can't communicate is that they don't have emotional intelligence. And I say, well, that's not exactly what it means. But, as you meant, it's being self-aware. And part of that is being open to listening to others, right?
Yes.
So it's
Yes.
being open to that feedback and learning how to be responsive rather than reactive, as we
Yes.
talked about before. And so I
Yes.
think that is a huge part is, from the point of curiosity, help me understand, or having those non-threatening conversations, or when there's conflict, it doesn't have to be win or loss. What are some things that you can utilize from each person with their strengths, and how can we blend it to make it the best solution?
Yes, absolutely. And I can hear people say, "Oh yeah, this yet another thing I have to learn about communication," because it feels like there's so many new things that
Hmm.
come about. But I let people know that emotional intelligence is not new. It's just a framework around what we've been trying to teach for all along, around listening and being respectful and considering other people and not taking things personally and not thinking it's all about you. All of those are emotional intelligent traits. We've just been saying them in a very common sense
Mhm.
way, but now we have a way to kind of gauge where you stand on it so that maybe you can learn more about yourself in order to, correct some behaviors that are a little bit off. But absolutely, active listening, most of the time we listen just enough so that we can respond versus really hearing the other person, and being present in that moment and responding to, not only what they're saying, but responding to it from a place that, okay, I know my response is going to be based with all of my stuff. So
Mhm.
I'm bringing all of my stuff and my limited awareness to the table. You're bringing all your stuff and your awareness to the table. And somewhere in the middle is where the truth lies, or where the place of commonality or communication can actually really take place. But this is not, I know it feels new, but it's really not new.
So, and you just hit on something that I talk about in some of my other speeches as well, is that whenever you're talking about communication, my perspectives and experience dictate the way that I think and interpret your messages. Just like the way
Yes.
that you have had experiences and your perspectives are going to interpret what you have in your mind. So, I grew up in Houston, Texas, which is a massive city. I now live in a small town in Mississippi of less than 2,000 people. So when somebody in my town says, "Oh my gosh, can you believe the traffic?" My mind goes to Houston, Texas. But in actuality, they're talking about two cars that are one four-way stop and maybe a tractor or a, rig or something that are backed up at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And I'm thinking of the interchange of I-10 and Beltway 8 that has 27 lanes going in different directions that are backed up. But it's all
Hmm.
about how I interpret the message based on my experiences and perceptions. So, and
Yes.
perspectives. So that's one thing that I always ask folks is when you're teaching or when you're talking or when you're having a conversation, you're trying to share that movie that's going on in your mind with somebody else. But
Hmm.
as you're speaking, they might not be getting the same movie.
Exactly. Exactly.
So
If they've only seen a black and white, they're not getting the technicolor that you are trying to put down on the table. I mean, that's so
that's
true.
right.
And that's why we always have to come from a place of curiosity. Because I know that if you're communicating something to me, I know I'm filtering it through my lens, which is why it's
Mhm.
so important to just always check in to say, here's what I'm hearing, here's how I'm interpreting, here's how I'm taking in what you're saying. Are we on the same page? If we just checked in with each other, we can actually get to the that commonality and that ability to communicate where we're actually both seeing the same photo, right? We're both seeing the same picture and
Yes.
having both the same visualization. Because now, Brene Brown talks about this so much, about language and how we use language. And, one word for one person can mean something completely different from another because of our experience, right? Traffic is a common word, but it means something very different, like you said, in Houston or in Chicago or LA or New York,
Mhm.
than it does in a very small rural town. Yeah, my dad grew up in a town. Yeah, well, he lived in a town called Glendive in Montana, and I remember when they got a stoplight, I think for the first time in that town, it was like a big deal, and they started talking about traffic, and I'm like, what? Like it's gonna be this big thing now that they have a traffic light, in the town.
Yes.
But
Yes.
different perspectives, you bring all of that to the table. And that's why we always want to check in with each other and have that curiosity. It's the thing that helps for, particularly with generations, because we definitely have different languages, when we're talking to each other, the vernacular that they use, and the meaning of words for them is very different. So always coming from that place of curiosity and not knowing or judging is going to make the big difference.
Well, and I have two teenage boys. One's 14 and one's 15. So they come home with either grunts and groans that all mean something different or these random words that are now the new part of the language. And I always have to say, help me understand what that means. When I hear that, is that a
Yes.
good thing Or is that a bad thing?
Yes,
So
exactly,
just be my translator
exactly.
for a minute.
Exactly. My youngest is actually 25, and I was talking about Vaseline. I don't know if it's
Yeah.
Vaseline, right? And I was playing and I said, yes, the lean, the lean. I think she said, Mom, that doesn't mean the same thing today that you think it does. And I'm like, oh my gosh.
You have
My
to be
gosh.
careful.
Right.
So you were just talking about check-ins, and one of the things that I read as I was, exploring you as you were coming in is you're talking about a check engine light whenever you're talking about organizations. And we have engine lights, we have maintenance guidance, we have all of these things that we have for mechanical issues, right? For our cars, for our appliances, even ourselves if something breaks down. So help us dive into the check engine light within an organization, whether it's communication, whether it's focusing on policies and procedures rather than people. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, for me, it means those little subtle things that are happening, and sometimes not too subtle, things that are happening in your organization that you need to give some notice on. They're not at the level where it's all hands on deck, but there's enough going on that you need to stop for a moment and get a little bit of a check-in or a checkup to make sure that nothing further is going to happen or more damage is going to happen. So, for example, if you're noticing in that your retention rates are not what they need to be, or you notice in certain departments you're seeing an exodus of women or or men or people of a certain generation, right? If you're just noticing those things, or if you're hiring, you're trying to hire and recruit and you're not getting the type of talent that you otherwise would like to have in your recruitment process, what's going on with your reputation, or how are people viewing the organization that you're not getting the kind of applications that you want. If there's promotion opportunities and you're noticing that you're not getting a lot of women going after certain positions, or you're not getting people even going after the promotion positions that you have available, right? There's just certain little things that are going on that if you're paying attention, there are little check engine light moments that you want to start delving into deeper to see what is going on and what type of initiatives or changes that you need to make to address them before they become really big problems in your organization.
So I love that. And I think that the caveat to that though is that you have to recognize that something has changed, right? So what is a baseline? How do we make sure that our leaders know what the baseline is?
Yeah.
I mean, these are
Yeah.
probably things they should know, but for somebody who's new going, "Ooh, maybe I should start looking into those things." How would I know if I'm a healthy organization or not, or if something has changed, if it's been sick for so long?
Yeah, well, that's really a good point. A lot of it depends on what your mission, vision, and values are, right? If you
Mm,
say you're an organization that values XYZ or has a goal of achieving ABC in terms of their recruitment or retention or profitability or filling certain roles or things of that nature, and you're not reaching those, that needs to be paid attention to. Or
mhm,
even if your HR department is getting exit interviews and is getting some data from those exit interviews as to like why people are leaving, and you're getting a lot of people leaving. That's a check engine light moment. If one of your top leaders left and all of a sudden there's a mass exodus of other people leaving behind that leader, right? Something's happening that maybe you want to pay attention to and notice before it gets too much. But you're right. Organizations that aren't really living into or leaning into their values and missions into that organization, they won't pay attention to those things.
mhm,
That's how you know the difference between those who just say one thing and those who are actually living the values that they're putting out there, right? It's kind of like what
mhm.
you talked about in the situation where there's a lot of toxic positivity within an organization where they're winning awards, and from the outside, oh no, everyone's happy. But on the inside, people are quitting, people are fighting,
Mm.
people aren't getting things done. There's a lot of turnover and changes in departments and things of that nature, even though from the external perception, it seems like everything is going great. These are
Yep.
little things you want to watch for.
Well, and I've also seen that some organizations, they ask for feedback, but they don't necessarily want the truth.
Oh, right.
So they want, in fact, I've seen experience with one organization that they used to do feedback on administrators, give us some information. How do you think your administrators are doing? But because there was so much negativity, they decided to stop doing them rather than to fix the issue. Or on the exit interview, it's just really, why did you exit? Do we have all of your stuff? But it's not really, is it personal business? You can't share the reasons why you're leaving because nobody really wants to know.
Right.
So I think
Right.
that's kind of a telltale sign that, okay, something is not, that organization is not well. Something is going on. If you don't want
Yes.
the real answers because you're not willing to fix it.
Right. And or there's all this toxic positivity where we always
Mhm.
that whenever you're in a staff meeting or a team meeting and you bring up that something's not working and that gets shut down.
Yes.
Well, because now you're being negative and you're not being supportive and you're just pointing out something very practical that, but if we did this, here are the implications and we need to think about the implications, but that's not being welcomed. And so that is a very important thing to look at when there's the situations of toxic positivity. And I actually wrote a piece, I think, for LinkedIn to like look for some of the signs of that in your organization, because that is something that's a check engine light
Well,
moment.
I love that. I mean, I love that term, toxic positivity. Not that it's a good thing, but I just like having a term for that. Well,
Yes.
as we are coming towards the end, we have about 4 minutes before we are through today. Share with me briefly your thoughts on mentorship. Do you feel that that's beneficial for women who are working in leadership?
Such a great question. That's a big conversation, but let me just say
Well, and we
this.
might have to join each other again or have a
I
follow-up that
know.
we post. So,
Because here's my thing with mentorship. There's so many factors that depends on make if it's a good mentorship program or not. Too often mentorship programs aren't formalized enough. And so you have people randomly doing it. And so you have very disparate experiences from people. So some people have great mentors, and some people have horrible situations. So that's why it's hard for me to say yes, mentorship or
Mhm.
not. So first of all, you need to have a formalized program. You need to make sure that those who are stepping up to be mentors are trained on what it means to be a mentor, and that the people who are being the mentees are also trained on how to take ownership for their direction and what they want to be mentored on, so that it's a partnership and not just a one up one down relationship where someone is saying just do what I say and you're following it and it may not be the right thing for you. So that's
Mhm.
why I said for me it's a little bit of a complicated thing. And you
Yes.
want to have people who are really gung-ho and excited about supporting someone on their journey and understanding what they need and are able to open doors and position them for the success that they need to have, giving them the advice that they need to have and the resources they need to have in order to be successful. So yes, while I think mentorship programs are fabulous and can work, there's a lot that needs to be done to really make sure that they are effective in the way that people are intending them to be.
I love that. So, as we close, what is a final word of wisdom or encouragement in about a minute that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Well, one of the things I would say is like build that self-confidence muscle as much as you can. Stop looking for external validation to support your belief in yourself or what's possible for yourself, and
Mhm.
start just building that internal muscle and that internal validation so that you feel the most confident to be able to achieve any and everything you want to do within your career and in your life.
My gosh, I love that so much. And yes, we're probably going to have a follow-up that we post somewhere for people to have. So this has just been such an incredible conversation, but unfortunately, we are out of time. And so I would love for you folks that are listening to join my Facebook community for women in education, search Do Good Leadership. And to access all the links in one location, visit the voiceamerica.com page. And so if you would like to reach out to Dr. Carol Parker Walsh, you can visit her on her website, carolparkerwalsh.com, and we'll make sure that it's in our notes for the show. But with a life of experience in education, I would love to be a speaker at your next event or work directly with you through my Empowering Women in Educational Leadership Mentorship Program. We are out of time for this episode, but tune in next month on the Voice America Network Empowerment Channel. I love to leave you with my favorite quote by Eleanor Roosevelt. A good leader inspires people to have confidence in the leader. A great leader inspires people to have confidence in themselves. Thank you for joining us today. See you next time.
All clear. Great show.
All right. Thank you so much.
No problem. Hope you both have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. You too. Bye bye.
Thanks, you too. That
All
went by
right.
so fast.
I know. I love that was
Oh my
54
gosh.
minutes. That was 54 minutes. Can you believe it?
Wow. Wow. It was a good conversation. I hope for you. I hope that
Oh my gosh.
that worked well for you.
It was fantastic because I started with some of my questions and then it led directly into a few of your questions that I knew you would definitely remember. And then I'm sorry, but my cat kept jumping up on my desk. So if you saw my arm going around, I was trying to keep her off of my desk and out of sight. But let me go ahead and stop the recording real fast so that
Oh,
if we
did you
have
want
any
to take a screenshot too?